Well, first of all, welcome to the Danube Institute and to this and to our lecture this evening, which is a lecture and a conversation, because I shall be asking Dr. Ehrenfeld to speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then I'll ask a few questions. Then I'll hope to open it up to the floor, because I see some familiar faces around, and I know that you are an audience that tends to ask questions and want to be involved in the debate, and we certainly like that. The second thing is that I just want to mention an event that's happening on Wednesday. We're having a conference in the morning. I think it starts at registration at 9, on law, on courts. Rachel. The conference will be on courts, on governments, and on rights, and the different way these three entities influence each other or don't influence each other. We have a distinguished audience of experts on the law, not all of whom are lawyers, and the conference will be a morning conference and end with lunch. The speakers include Professor of Law at Queensland University, James Allen, and James is somebody who has become something of an expert in recent years on the ways in which as courts have gradually begun to exercise more power in relation to governments, including over democratic governments and internationally, so there's been something of a reaction to that, and he's going to examine both the revolution in legal theory and constitutional advance, and also the reaction against it from people who think that, in a sense, this has taken too much power from democratic governments and from electoral majorities. Another speaker will be David Martin Jones of King's College London, who's an expert in the impact of lawfare on the conduct of war and on the conduct of foreign policy. And David will be, and he's also an expert, as our speaker today, Rachel Ehrenfeld, is, on terrorism. And he's going to examine the legal ways in which the environment internationally and domestically has changed legally to, in a sense, place some curbs and restrictions on governments in their attempts to combat terrorism. We have a very distinguished Bulgarian jurist, former prime minister, and former constitutional court judge there, who's going to speak to us on the ways in which the courts have felt necessary to, in advance, to uphold true democratic standards against governments and and against corruption and against the dangers that liberal opinion sees in democracies which, in a sense, have ceased to be liberal democracies. Now, these are all rich, fruitful, and highly controversial topics. And we'd be delighted if you turn up. It's at the National Academy of Arts and Sciences. You all know where that is. And it's going to be held, as I say, on Wednesday. So if you would like to contact us and tell us if you're coming, we would be delighted to see you. I think it's going to be an important occasion. Now, that's the beginning of a short advertisement for the Danube Institute. The second half of it is to say, in general, what we stand for is that we are conservative in culture, we are classical liberal in economics, and we are Atlanticist in foreign policy. You might say that we reflect the opinions of my old boss, Margaret Thatcher, in all of those regards, and those opinions are still very powerful, though of course they're increasingly challenged as new developments occur in international and in domestic politics. So that's where we stand, but we also stand for debate, and we believe in always ensuring where possible that when we have strong opinions put forward, that we have other opinions available as well, and there's a debate about them. Sometimes that debate is between speakers, and a lot of the time, as possibly today, it will be between the speaker and the audience, and that's something we very much encourage, because we believe that one of the problems with Central Europe in recent years is that there's been too much partisanship and not enough debate. Partisanship is much healthier when there is a genuine debate between both sides, and that's one of the things we stand for. The other is we believe that the opinions and views and philosophies and histories of Central Europe are really not sufficiently understood, either in the other half of Europe or in the rest of the Western countries, particularly the English-speaking countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia. And so we try to be a transmission belt between Central Europe and these countries, in bringing people in from those countries and also sending out Hungarians to them. Last year we sent out, well, I say sent out, we made it possible for Geza Jarzynski, the former foreign minister, to visit Australia and speak to important audiences and conferences there, giving a view of giving a Hungarian and a Central European view of the migrant crisis, which is overwhelming us at the time. So, as I say, we stand for clear opinions, but we stand for debate on them as well. And that's, therefore, one of the reasons I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Ehrenfeld today. I'm not going to read her biography out. I will say that she is a distinguished author and lecturer and researcher. She is the president of two organizations. I must make sure I get this right: the American Center for Democracy and the Economic Warfare Institute. And she has advised governments, she's given evidence to Congress and Parliament. She has engaged in a very famous libel action, or rather counter-libel action. It is due to her that something called Rachel's Law now exists both federally and in several states of the United States as a result of her countersuing a Saudi billionaire who claimed in the British courts that she had libeled him. This was a very significant occasion because, as many of you may be aware, people with deep pockets, some despots, some not, were reacting to books critical of them by suing in the English courts, where the standard of proof for somebody to defend themselves against the charge of libel is extremely high.
In England?
In England, yes,
well,
that's right.
I don't know if it's high, it's upside down.
Well, I think you're being charitable. I think most journalists feel it's too high. And when you sued in the American, countersued, and you made it possible, you made it very difficult indeed for people to go to the English courts let us say for somebody from, well, the Middle East or Australia to go to the English courts and sue you or anyone else over a book that had been published in the United States and so on. So this was a very significant libel action, and it was very important that it was won, and it's still more important that the American legislatures, both federal and state, have actually now brought in their own laws to Rachel's Law to in a sense, to entrench this defense of free speech in the United States. Rachel Dr. Ehrenfeld is somebody who has expertise rather in most of the questions concerned with Middle East politics, and that's why I'll be throwing the
not only.
Not cyber. Only, but no. Well, I mean, I have to stop somewhere, so I can't just read.
Okay.
And so we'll be opening the debate on those questions later. But for the moment, we're going to focus on one particular aspect, which is terrorism. Terrorism is obviously it's a major threat, a growing threat, and one that it is clear Western governments find it very hard to combat effectively. So the question we're raising today is, how does this threat emerge? We can give all kinds of sociological explanations, but who finances it? Where does the finance come from? What's the money trail? And does it sometimes come from people like us who mistakenly give to causes which turn out to be not entirely innocent? So that is, I think, the question on the table. It's the first of many questions tonight, perhaps, but it's an important first, and that's why it gives me great pleasure to invite Dr. Ehrenfeld to address us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, and Melissa, and Naomi, and Violet. Really, you worked hard because it was a little bit complicated. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here. I will start, well, I will answer your question later. I will start with 9/11, 2001. I was on the phone at my desk. It was 8:15 in the morning, and I was speaking with the Wall Street Journal editor in Brussels, the European Wall Street Journal headquarters in Brussels. And we were discussing the article that they asked me to write the week earlier. They said, well, you write about such exotic things like terrorist financing. This is 2001. Well, why don't you write something about it? I said, okay. So I did. And as we were talking, from my window, I could see that the World Trade Center had been hit. And I heard also something in the news. So I went and I saw what happened. I went back to my desk. There was still, I could still talk on the phone because later the phone died. And I changed the opening sentence, the opening paragraph from my article, and I wrote, okay, so this is who committed this, and this is who funded this event, which was interesting. That appeared in the Wall Street Journal on September 12th. And I will never forget, I saw the World Trade Center disappear, a lot of smoke, and it was, and I was right because, and it was really interesting that the Wall Street Journal asked me a week ahead of it to write an article saying, well, this is such an exotic topic, terrorist financing. Well, it is too bad that the Wall Street Journal and other newspapers didn't actually do a little bit more work to find out who is funding terrorism. Because terrorism was already known, American targets had been hit, the PLO had been active for a long time, Hezbollah was around, so why not look into this? Well, when you look at terrorism, what you have to do is follow the money. But because you have to follow the money, and this is answering your questions, why didn't government actually be able to tackle it better? Why not follow the money? Because very often the people they do business with, governments, heads of states, big corporations, big entities, fund terrorism. So, well, business, you would want to continue to do business. These are just marginal groups, so what are we going to do about them? But because the West actually had let mainly, we are talking mostly about Islamic terrorism, flourished for a very long time in advance, we have a huge problem today. And even in the United States, there was a 9/11 commission, the names of the Saudis were not published. Why not? Well, part of the royal family, close to the royal family, we don't really want to say that they funded Al-Qaeda. So they were escorted out of the United States by police to the airport so that they can go home after 9/11. Among those people was also the head of the Saudi Arabia's Middle East biggest bank, the National Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia, Khalid bin Mahfouz. When I write, I go after who funds terrorism, follow the money, I identify people by name. Not everybody does it, because usually the editors don't want to get into trouble, right? I didn't, and because Saudis had sued, actually the Saudis had sued the Wall Street Journal too, not about this, about another Saudi. So the Saudi sued me, he was the banker of the royal family, and he funded Al-Qaeda. And why I refused to accept the British jurisdiction, because the United States is the only country where the First Amendment guarantees your free speech. It's in the First Amendment. So I said, well, if he wants to sue me as an international businessman, he should come and sue me in New York. Anyway, there was some loophole in the law. We fixed it. But there were many others who sued, and this Saudi who sued me, he threatened to sue or sued more than 40 publishers and writers, many of them from the United States. It's the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, Time, Los Angeles Times, name it. He sued everybody, and everybody paid him off. I was the only one who stood up and said, no, if he wants, he's a terrorist, here is the evidence. He funds terrorism, he wants to sue me, he should come to the United States. Why? Because the burden of proof, according to libel laws in the United States, is if he claims that I defamed him, he should come and prove that what I said is wrong, that what I said is not true. I don't have to do anything. So in England, if he sues me for libel, he has to, and this is still more or less the British law, is I have to come to court and prove that he didn't do or did do what I said he did. And in some cases, it's very difficult because the British government had been involved with the Saudis for a long time. There were big scandals of multi-billion-dollar arms deals. And the British judges really didn't want to do much about it. The government will not help me with information. The CIA kept the information secret. Moreover, the head of his foundation, who was put on October 3rd, 2001, on the list of terrorist financiers designated, he was taken off the list. So when I went to the Treasury Department and I asked, well, why was he taken off the list? The head of the department said, well, he doesn't know. He asked his assistant to check it. And then his assistant came back to me and said, well, I wasn't at the office the same day. Excuse me, this is a government office, you have archives? So the attitude, just telling it so to tell you that there is an attitude not to go after big financiers of terrorism. You do a lot of business with them. You want them to continue to buy arms from you and do other businesses. So that's a big problem. But the problem also is not with funding terrorism. The bombing of the World Trade Center with the flight lessons and with the travel of everybody cost about $500,000. That's nothing to do such a huge terrorist event. What cost billions of dollars to the Saudis until 9/11 was to prepare the background, the basis, to recruit all the people, to build all the mosques, to send madrasas and books and everything, so that there will be more people who will be indoctrinated and willing to go on this kind of missions. And that has not been, I think that this is not even understood very well today, that what is very important is to cut their ideological pinning. And the ideology is being promoted by money. And so, but the money itself, the terrorist actions themselves really don't cost very much. So who are the big promoters of Islamic radicalism and terrorism today? The Saudis are still continuing, only they pay, and they've been doing it for a long time, go do it somewhere else, not in Saudi Arabia. The Iranians now are doing it even better than ever because, and they are doing it big time, because now they have a few $1 billion from the United States, thanks to Obama. And the Turks have been doing it for a long time. Mr. Erdogan is Mr. Muslim Brotherhood, and he has been doing it for a long time, together with Qatar. Other Gulf states are doing it too, but this is really where most of the money coming from. A lot of money is also coming, as you asked, from charity. If sending some money to the poor refugees or orphans and widows in the Middle East, well, very often, if you give money to this, to Zakat, which is the Islamic charities, if you send them money, usually it very often goes to future widows and future orphans. And there is no, who is distributing the money? the imams. And they are doing it also with financial Islamic banking. I don't know if Islamic banking actually exists in Hungary, maybe yes. Because what they do, if you are doing business with an Islamic bank, and by the way, there is no banks in the Quran, there is no Islamic banking in the Quran, not in the Sharia, this is the invention of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan al-Banna understood, the father of the Muslim Brotherhood, that when he organized the movement, this is really political Islam, how that in order to exist and to flourish, they need money. So they invented Islamic banking. And if you do business with them, you have to give money, it's mandated to give money to zakat, to an Islamic charity. And the imam who is supervising the zakat decides where to send the money. You don't have any supervision, you don't know where the money is going. Then we have the European Union's funding, has been funding the Palestinian, the PLO, and Hamas for a long time, as well as the State Department, the World Bank, the UN. European countries separately, in addition to the EU, are sending them a lot of money. And it was nice to see that Norway, for a change, Israelis made it known to the Norwegians that the money that they were giving to a school, the school was named after a terrorist, after a woman, a Palestinian woman who killed, 10 Israelis. So they demanded that the organization, that the school will return the money, and they got the money back. But this is very unusual. But if you don't do anything about terrorism, if you don't confront them, if you don't punish them, they will continue to do and they will do more. A very big source of money to fund terrorism is, and to expand the base, is drugs. In the Soviet encyclopedia, Soviet military encyclopedia, recommended that what do you do in how to undermine a targeted country that you are not at war with, at open war with, during so-called peacetime. Well, one of the things they recommended, actually the second thing, was use drugs, sell them drugs. Why? Drug is the best weapon. It is, first of all, you can sell it anywhere. There will be clients, and there will be more and more clients all the time. It's really, instead of taking cash, you have drugs. It corrupts the society that you are targeting, and it causes all kind of economic, it costs money also to the society because of health and all kind of delinquency. And if you show pictures of Westerns who are dying on the street, dirty, injecting drugs, this is a good propaganda tool to show that these people are corrupt, and these people deserve to die. So the Syrians have been involved in drug trafficking, the PLO have been involved in drug trafficking, ISIS, of course, the Taliban. And this is really the biggest achievement of the United States and NATO in all these years in Afghanistan. When they went into Afghanistan, liberated Afghanistan from the Taliban in 2001, the Taliban had in caves something like, a little bit over a ton of raw opium. Today, Afghanistan, we don't know exactly because these are things, they found about a ton and there was nothing else. Today, it's illegal trade, so it's very difficult to guesstimate, but they are producing not only raw opium. From Afghanistan, there is about 10,000 tons of heroin and some opium. These are billions of dollars. And they buy arms, and they do everything with it because it's money, and they corrupt the society. Interestingly enough, Hezbollah, the Ayatollah and a few other imams there also issued a special fatwa that will allow the, or recommend that the Iranians, whatever, Hezbollah and others, will sell arms, will sell drugs to the West, to their enemies. Similarly, when anybody remember the Sandinistas in Nicaragua? When Raúl Castro went to Nicaragua, since Cuba had been a big sponsor, he also told the people there, and it was recorded, a defector from the Sandinistas in the United States came with it. He actually told them the same thing. He quoted the Soviet military encyclopedia. Why use drugs? Because some people who were ideologically pure said, well, how can you sell drugs? This is something bad. So no, this is very good. This is the best target against the enemy. So it was interesting to see it both on the secular communist side and also on the religious side. So, and that's a huge problem and a very profitable problem. The problem with drugs is also, so why are the government doing more about it? Because there is a lot of money in it. And it's illegal economy, but the money goes back, because when they launder the money, it goes back to the economy, some of it. So government don't want to do much about any money that is coming to the economy. It's a big problem. As for other ways, since technology had improved, hacking is a big, big thing. Oh, by the way, North Korea. North Korea has special industry of producing, well, growing opium and producing heroin. And every year, the person or the organization or the group that had been able to produce the most gets the White Flower Award. That's an annual event. You see, it's a financial tool that everybody can use and using. There is so much to say about terrorism. Okay, so the Saudis, we mentioned the Saudis, Iran. Now, there would be very little, without the help of bankers and accountants, we will have very little money flowing around for terrorists and other crooks. We talk a lot about transparency for all kinds of organizations, and you have all kinds of international organizations. The Basel Group, for example, issued recently the latest report about where is the easiest money, where is the place the most acceptable place for money laundering. So they actually had Qatar. Qatar is a wonderful place. They don't launder money. Really? The Iranians were very happy to hear that. Lebanon, according to them, is very tough with money laundering. This is a bad joke. If I didn't see it in a report from the Basel Group, I would have thought that this is, somebody's making some, really, it's a mockery. So relying on statistics and official information or institutional information, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And when we talk about illegal trades, it's hard to know. Terrorism is not exactly legal, but we have a problem with terrorism too, because there is no international definition for terrorist at all. So if somebody's terrorist is somebody's either freedom fighter or jihad fighter. And it's a problem because how do you tackle it? So we know that terrorists are people who are killing people, but going back again to the base, and the base is really spreading the ideology. And I didn't see many, I saw only actually one woman. I came last night. I walked in the street and I saw only one young woman with a headscarf. In New York, by now, I would have seen thousands. I didn't see them 5 years ago. Hardly ever. What is the proliferation of this? And you see it everywhere. Turns out that they are being paid. They go to the mosque. Usually it's lower class, working, or unemployed, and they pay them money. They pay them weekly or monthly payment to wear the, and if you go to wear the headscarf, you go to the Islam, you go to the mosque, and you say, you swear in Muhammad names or Allah Akbar. It's very simple to convert. And why are they doing it? They are doing it because, or they are spending money. Why are they doing it? Because to increase familiarity with Islam. So if we get used to it that everybody is wearing a headscarf, then tomorrow they will come up with something else and people will, okay, that's fine, we did that, nothing happened, let's do the other thing. So I think that the West has to be very vigilant in as my friend here, Ken, says, to be able to nurture and keep their Western values. That's really what is important. There are other issues that go to cyber and other international political issues, but this is basically really what is the general picture of it.
Rachel, can I interrupt at this point?
No, I'm fine.
Right, good, thank you. And raise one or two clarificatory questions first, and then we'll throw this discussion open to the floor. The first is, let's ask a few questions about the identities of the people who are financing the terrorism. You use, for example, the phrase the Saudis. Now, I take it that's not the royal Saudi government. Although, are there people in it who are?
Yeah.
And are there people in it who are combating this? I mean, there is a Saudi intelligence service. It cooperates with Western intelligence services. President Trump just went to Saudi Arabia, and he opened a grand center for the combating of terrorism, which I think included all of the Sunni Arab countries and probably others as well. So when we're talking about the Saudis, who do we mean? Or I should also say, what do we mean? Because obviously we may be talking about institutions here as much as we are about individuals. And secondly, could I just say, how do we know these things? Sorry,
okay.
Go ahead.
The first center to combat terrorism in Saudi Arabia opened in 2002. The main expert that came to advise how to do it was George Soros, by the way, to Saudi Arabia. And the papers wrote about it and said, oh, here's the American billionaire who comes to advise. Nobody said that he's Jewish. That's fine. But they started the first time in 2002. They have, under American pressure and international pressure, they decided, okay, we will do, because they fund through their foundations. They have international foundations. So they decided, okay, so we will not fund, we will tell them not to fund any more terrorism, we will eliminate some, nothing happened. The king took it under himself, the previous king, that he will do it. They continue to operate. So there is a very big gap between what they announce and what they do. Sure, they are now very concerned because the Iranians are thinking seriously about removing the Saudi royal family, and so do other radical Muslims. It's funny because the Saudis are radical and they haven't changed really. Sure, the new Prince Crown, the Crown Prince is now, says that he wants to move towards more liberalism, so women voted. I don't know, they're still not allowed to drive a car. But they want to stay in place. They don't want to go anywhere. So they understand also because there are many people who are unemployed in Saudi Arabia, They were continuing to live on subsidies from the government, and the oil is not exactly bringing enough revenues. We should not start a collection for them yet. They are really trying to control it, at least against them. But they are continuing to support other groups and other people. They are still continuing to pay for madrasas. They are still continuing to pay for mosques to build in all kinds of places. With the Muhammad cartoons, the international big campaign against all the demonstrations that you saw all over the world and some violence started when the Saudi ambassador in Denmark went back to Saudi Arabia. He arrived there, and together with the imam on a Friday, they made an announcement. This was insult to Muhammad. Let's go. And that's how it started. So they are not exactly, I believe that they don't want much more violence, but they will still want to promote Islam.
Can I just then ask this? There are 2 points here, aren't there? One is the question of the raw financing of raw terrorism. I mean, giving money to people who use it to buy bombs and shoot other people.
No, I'm talking about the base.
Well, I'm going to. We'll come back to that. Now, the other is the base. The other question is the base. Now, I remember 1998. I was taken to lunch overlooking the Bosphorus by a Turkish general at the end of a conference which we'd both been present at, and he said to me, "Look, why are you Americans?" I wasn't making distinctions here. Why are you Americans allowing the Saudis to finance mosques all over Turkey? Because what's happening is the country is being radicalized, and the Kemalist government, I think he just said, our present system is not going to survive if this carries on. Can't you stop them? Now, I don't say it was totally news to me, but the urgency and the gravity of his remarks were. I mean, I was very struck by that. And I came back and I wrote something about it, and obviously we've become more and more aware of it since then. But the question, I think, is this, and this is my second question, the first one being about the raw financing of raw terrorism. The question is, how do we in democratic societies actually prevent what I would call kind of religious education, which you're saying is the ideology which then provides the terrorists?
So in America, you have laws that allow you to say anything you want, and surely religious freedom. So by saying something, and the laws about incitement are it's very difficult to sue anybody or to convict anybody for incitement, to bring even a complaint about that. So you really have to yell fire in the full theater in order to do that. But there are very strict anti-incitement laws in Britain, in other European countries. They are not using them. They are simply not using them. And, so what is free speech? When a preacher comes up and tells you, go and kill all the infidels should be killed, and they have videotapes and they're showing them how to stab people and where to stab them, you have to wait until something happens. Well, I think democracy is nice, but you have to live in order to practice it. So we have to be able to, we need to survive, right? And we had this argument in the United States as well, and actually I was surprised to see that a very liberal lawyer wrote an article in the New York Times saying, well, mind you, and the New York Times published it, it was not lately, we need to survive in order to be able to practice democracy, yes. So the West has really a big problem here. And so in many places, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, when El-Sisi came, now the government actually supervises what is being said in the mosques. If you advertise and if you have propaganda to go after the government, you're out. And they take them to seminars and they keep educating them. And why? Because the Muslim Brotherhood, which is really the movement that is pushing it much more than the Saudis today, they are pushing the conversion. They are using dawah, which is proselytization, really, with finances in order to bring Muslims to the fold, in order to bring converts to the fold. So we have to do something because they are moving very fast. And it's a big problem, I agree with you, and a little bit about the confusion between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Saudis. Because the Muslim Brotherhood is thought still in some places to be just, it's politics. They are supposedly more, they are not radical. Well, no, they are preaching for radicalism and they want to change all your system. They want to replace the Western system, Western democracy, and in order to fool the West, they even they abuse the terminology. They said we want Islamic democracy. Islamic democracy is an oxymoron. Islam controls both politics and religion and everything that you do in life. So how can you have Islamic democracy? But this is how they're trying to sell themselves, and many people actually buy it.
You presumably you could conceivably have democracy in an Islamic country.
No.
Well, okay.
No, in the majority of Islam, not when the government. You have to have separation between the mosque and the political system.
Render unto Caesar, etc. Yeah. Thanks. Now let me just ask you quickly to return to the question of the raw. How we know. Yeah, the money. Where the money? Well, let me put it this way. You mentioned the European Union and individual European countries financed terrorism. Now, I believe that I've seen some evidence of this.
The
Palestinian terrorism. But the question is, what happens when complaints or evidence is produced that's showing the money that was given for this charitable purpose ends up in this uncharitable purpose?
I will tell you what. Yeah. I want to testify in the European Parliament. And I showed them how, so money, they give money. So we showed them that money that was supposed to go to build the sewage system was used in order to have a training camp. Money that was supposed to go to a hospital, some of it is being stolen by the Palestinian leadership. But money was sent to build a hospital, went to have a summer camp for children from 5-year-old and on, training them paramilitarily, and also staging, this is for entertainment, they were having plays and play a role of how to stab and how to kill Israelis. Right? So, by testifying there, the Austrian representative, the committee, stood up and said, I want you to prove me that this euro was used to pay for this thing. Okay, I cannot prove that this euro. Money is fungible. But if you don't give them money, they won't be able to use so much money in order to do all these things.
I have another question on the same lines. You mentioned President Sisi. Now, I think everybody would be impressed, or was impressed, by the remarks he made was it at Al-Akram University?
Al-Azhar.
I'm sorry.
And he made it since.
And he said to the assembled Islamic dignitaries there, look, the Islamic world is 1.5 billion people. It cannot declare war on another 6 billion people. And that we have to, in a sense, accommodate our faith to the fact that we have to coexist with other faiths and other religions and other states and other opinions. And I thought that was brave. I also thought, obviously, it was correct. And then I was very struck by the fact that it received almost no echoing support from Western political or religious leaders, in fact.
Only from Trump.
Okay, only from President Trump. But nonetheless, it's interesting that this didn't happen.
Sure.
And I'm curious as to why that was, since it would seem that he was supporting them, but they were not supporting him supporting them.
Sisi said something else. He didn't only say that we cannot kill all these people, I mean, to be at war. He said we cannot live in the 7th century. Times have changed. So we have to bring it up, we have to modernize it, and we have to separate the mosque from, he's very religious, El-Sisi, but he keeps his religion to himself. He goes to mosque, he prays 5 times a day, it's fine. He doesn't want to force anybody to do the same, and he doesn't want anybody else to force them to do it. He was very brave saying it, and he said it actually since again. And the Western countries didn't respond the way they should have because I know it sounds kind of conspiratorial, the Muslim Brotherhood, not everybody, well, Muslim Brotherhood, people who are fellow travelers or supporting them, many in the West, say, no, he threw out the government, he didn't, the people didn't really want him, he should be put in prison, the whole change in Egypt was not right, 23 million people in the street, and it didn't mean anything to them, because, what's his name, Morsi before was elected in democratic election. That's what they do, they hijack the election. That's what Hamas did in Gaza with the Palestinians, right? So they used another name, they went to election, they were voted in because of whatever, now they are the rulers. So,
Sorry. No, I think we might return to that question in a minute, but there is one question that I want to ask more, and then I'm going to throw it open to everybody. And then, in addition to your answering the questions, other people on the floor might like to answer this one as well. And it's this comparison. After the war, when it became clear that the communist world was launching an attitude of hostility that became the Cold War to the West, one of the most important battlegrounds was the area of intellectual and cultural life and religion and politics, political ideas. And in fact, in order to combat what was a quite extensive population of people who sympathized with communism in Western countries, more so in Western Europe than in America, but in America too. The West launched the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was an attempt to make the case for liberty in a very high cultural level in the world. And various magazines like Encounter and forget the name of the German and French ones, but they were very significant, so to speak, battleships in the fight to establish the superiority of Western liberty over Soviet communism. And that was very important. Mm-hmm. Is there any way we can perhaps do that now? Because when I asked you before about how do we combat the idea of spreading the Islamist ideology within the normal rules of civil discourse and democratic law, we basically said, well, we can't allow democratic law to prevent us committing suicide, to make us commit suicide. And I agree with that, of course. But nonetheless, I think people are going to be more persuaded if they think that they can combat a dangerous ideology like this without curbing the liberties which they've become very used to.
So there was a very interesting development after the fall of the Soviet Union, which was communism may have left the ideology, communist ideology, may have left Russia, but it spread all over the world. And the idea of, so you start, the whole globalization movement started big time, and the left, the progressive left, had really developed a lot. And so you have intimidation. It's kind of strange. Why would the left, secular left, be supportive of this oppressive Muslims that kill women and children, that, everything against freedom. They control you completely. Why? Because it was against the colonial West, whatever colonialism is. And it is really strange. Also, the political correctness came along, and political correctness had helped tremendously to move the Islamic agenda forward. And it was under political correctness. So for example, the European Union changed their hate speech law in 2008. And so I have friends in Denmark who were attacked by reporters, also with the Muhammad cartoon, but others who were attacked by Muslims. And so I was invited to the Danish parliament and the Committee on the Judiciary, and they said to me, could you help us do something about these hate laws? These hate laws are really tying our hands. I said, well, you have members in the European Parliament. Why don't you go and look up who actually originated the law? Who lobbied for the law? Well, because we don't have Saudi Arabia in the European Union, or Turks at the time, and they said, well, how will people understand it? They were kind of really afraid of their own shadow. So if you don't want to help yourself, what can somebody else do? Yes, but you have to follow and you have to monitor really what is going on. And
well, I think that Solzhenitsyn said you cannot save something that doesn't want to save itself.
Yeah.
Shall we now throw it open to the floor? I'm sure there are a lot of people who've got points of view which will come at us from different angles. Let's. Yes, the lady there. Okay. I'm sorry. Wait for the microphone. And also, if people could give their name, and if they do represent an organization, the name of the organization.
Yes, thank you. My name is Anat Kalman, and I work for the Budapester Zeitung here, the German-speaking newspaper here in Budapest. One question, is there any money transfer or financial influence from Saudi Arabia through the European community? Is there something to support all this sort of friendly opinion towards Islamization?
There is more from Turkey. Turkey is really the most active, and because the Saudis were more focused on religion per se, on Wahhabism, pushing Wahhabism. The Muslim Brotherhood, under this guise of political Islam and Islamic democracy, were pushing the idea and pushing the ideology. And Erdogan, Muslim Brotherhood, look what happened in Turkey. They actually have been funding schools, many schools in the United States as well, and Islamic centers, Turkish centers. A lot of money from Turkey. Even through not only the government, businesses and individuals who are members of. I followed some big businesses like clothing businesses that are international, and wherever they are in many countries and very high. It's not the most expensive clothing, but it's men's clothing, by the way. It's not cheap either. And when they open a store, and I thought Turkey, they look kind of European maybe. They hire only Muslims. Now, by law, you cannot, choose who you are hiring, so no discrimination. But that's what is going on. And they send the money back. At the time I was following it, they sent money back actually to Egypt so that Morsi can win. So this was kind of highly illuminating. The Qatar is also very helpful, working with both the Iranians and the Muslim Brotherhood. And they have a lot of, they have many followers now in the West. Banks in Switzerland, in Liechtenstein, Cayman Island, and they are supporting the notion that, the false notion that Islam is fine, and that's what they do.
Thank you. Next question. Gentleman there in the middle of the... Yeah, yes, the...
Lady.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I thought it was the gentleman behind you. Oh,
Janet Karakesh. Just before I forget, to get to my question, you had mentioned it seemed that the number of young women wearing
Headscarf.
hijabs in New York now. Did you say that they are recent converts, or that they are Muslim who are?
Hijab. They are wearing the, and I know because I started asking. I said, "What is it?" All of a sudden, where is everybody? All of a sudden wearing headscarves?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't see them a year ago. Now everybody's wearing a headscarf. So I started looking around also and asking in other countries. So, and in countries where there is really a big divide. So for example, in Albania, who is the Christian and who is the Muslim, right? Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, the Christians saw in Christian villages and towns that many young women are starting to wear the hijab. So they started looking into it and said, okay, so they're being paid $100 a month. In Albania, it's a lot of money, extra money. In New York, they do it too. And they are, if you go to a grocery store or something, in Brooklyn, for example, there are many Middle Eastern grocery stores. You're being offered, so this is very chic. And if you look even at how it is being pushed culturally, the first time that the Wall Street Journal had an article about hijab is chic was about 5 years ago. I thought this is interesting. And then you could see that designers on the runways were showing women which are dressed like Muslims. Mm-hmm. This is to promote the notion. So they want to sell, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Dubai, they have a lot of money. So here's a new market to open to sell clothing. And so they're selling them there. But in order to be able to sell more, they are willing to do whatever it takes.
Okay. So my actual question, I'm wondering if we have to go back to a point where essentially we are not allowed to say or criticize anything about Muslims, and that the fundamental argument being, look, there are more than 1 billion Muslims. You do not say that they are all terrorists. Essentially, Muslim people are fine, upstanding, the same as you and me. And so when you start highlighting this kind of issue, and then one tangential one would be about the funding of terrorism, what you're doing is essentially making a big deal out of something that's a tiny, marginal, infinitesimally small segment of Muslims.
Well,
how do you counter that?
You started by saying, do we have to go back and not criticize Islam? We are not criticizing Islam now. So I do, but most people are not doing that.
But this is understood as an attack,
yeah,
and I think that's fundamental. I agree with you,
yeah.
But it's not how it's understood on the street.
Yeah.
Okay, it is considered an attack.
Yeah, because it is. Well, just go back a little bit with the question.
Mm-hmm. Since 99.9%,
okay.
Pull it out of a hat, are fine, upstanding people, Muslims. To start going on and on about this issue,
Okay.
it's maligning the entire Muslim population.
Muslims, by definition, don't have to be cannon fodders, right? They don't have to be jihadists. And there are some who actually stand up and say, not too many. The problem is that when they go to the mosque and they listen to the imam and they live in a community out of fear also, because they know each other, they will not do anything in order to counter what they are being told. Not everybody is willing to kill himself, okay? But look around you in the world. Anywhere you look, you see more and more women, more and more men. There's more criticism on secular behavior. Indonesia, which is the biggest Muslim country in the world, have been secular, and that's because of Saudi influence, by the way, is becoming more and more religious. So now they're starting to use Sharia law, Islamic law in courts. So you see it really progressing all the time. If nobody puts up nobody asks any question or criticize what is going on, then fine. You will end by not being able to say anything, even if you want.
I suppose a question that develops from Janet's question is this, isn't it? That are Western governments and Western public opinion, are they entitled to ask representatives of the Muslim community to condemn terrorism? Yeah. Or is that, as critics of that would say, or is that a question of attributing to millions of innocent people an attitude that in fact stems only from the terrorists?
They do it all the time. They condemn terrorism. Hamas killed a few people, blew up a few cars in Israel, or murdered a few people, drove over them. Abbas comes out and said, we really condemn this. And that's in English, and then in Arabic, the Palestinian television shows how they are celebrating that these are heroes because they killed some Israelis.
Yes, I mean, you're talking about the situation in the Middle East. I'm talking about the situation in places like Luton in England, where you have British troops returning from Afghanistan or jeered and booed by a mob, which is largely Muslim, and then local people say, well, look, this is intolerable behavior. We would like you to condemn it. And you get condemnations of an equivocal kind. And that, I think, is the question which is really facing the West. One of the questions.
One of the communists did the same. Lying you say anything in order to get your what you want, okay? So this is just being pragmatic. The Muslims, it's actually in the Quran. You can actually, it's a good thing. It's a mitzvah to lie. You are doing the right thing if you are lying to infidels. Fine. So to say something, to condemn it, it's okay.
I want other people to come in on this and other points, but before, just one last response. How would I feel if let's say I'm a Muslim girl or a Muslim boy born and brought up in Britain, but in a community that is religiously faithful, moral, observant? When I am asked to condemn something which is nothing whatever to do with me, I feel, but which is when I'm bearing kind of a scarlet letter marked T because I'm a Muslim.
Well, those who will say something, although their immediate community is not involved in terrorism, but the larger Muslim community, they will get them.
Yes.
So that is what's happening. That's how, for example, the Hezbollah is very well entrenched in Iranians in general, Iranian terrorism and the Quads, in Latin America. And so what they started to do is really by extorting other people who were they were not religious, they didn't want to do anything, but they came from there. So they were threatening they will do something to the family that is there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm prepared to be quite robust on this because I remember what happened in the Second World War when, after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, leading Japanese Americans who were cultural heroes in the country stepped out and made the strongest possible American patriotic statements. And I think that was important, and I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for the same things today. Now, maybe it is unreasonable, but I think not.
the difference is that was political. That was political. Here, it's a religion that masks itself or deceivingly saying that it's a political movement.
Yes, okay.
No, I'm sorry. That's a political movement that says that they are a religion.
Okay.
So this is the difference.
Well, let's again, let me throw the question back to the audience. Not this question, but any question that they want. Yes, the gentleman there.
Good evening, Zoltan Bac from the National University of Public Service. The first question would be the relation between cyber crimes and the financing of terrorism. And immediately, the second question, if you allow me, the actual role of Latin America in financing terrorism.
Actually, what?
Actual role of Latin America in financing terrorism.
Latin America is a big place.
Quite a big, yes.
Okay. Drugs.
Argentina, Bolivia, Chile.
Which? The government? The government of Bolivia? The government of Chile?
Not precisely.
Huh?
Not especially. Just whether these terrorist organizations have some basis.
Latin Americans have been, in the old days, not so old, the Soviet Union was training all terrorist organizations, okay? And the Iranians, by the way, were also trained by them. The PLO was trained by them. Everybody in Libya, everybody was trained by them. The Red Brigades, everybody. When the IRA, not that they needed any training, so when the Soviet Union was gone, so who took up the whole thing was Latin American drug cartels. And they were very active because they fought the government. So you need action. You need really, you try it in the battlefield. So that was Colombia and Peru, and so now we have some communism in Bolivia and Ecuador and in Venezuela a little bit. Venezuela is a big ground. It's really a haven for the Iranians that are operating from there all over the world, all over Latin America. And when the Syrian war started, there were planes going with money from Venezuela to Syria. Anybody was checking which plane is going where, what are they carrying? You don't know. And fighters, by the way, too. And Chavez was still alive, and there were big signs on the streets, "Thank you, Chavez," in Arabic.
And what refers to the first question.
Cyber and...
In financing terrorism.
You can hack into a bank and steal the money. Yeah, why not? Terrorists, ISIS is very good with cybercrime. The Iranians are fantastic in cybercrime. So it's not only Russians. Anybody who is good enough to do that can do it. And the big problem is that in the West, many business managers, the general public doesn't really understand what it is. And what do you have to do in order to protect yourself? In New York, we just heard that in the United States that the Security and Exchange was hacked, and they stole I don't know how much, and we don't hear, even when we hear about hacking much later, we don't know how much money was hacked. So there was a big hacking into Chase. And they said, well, something like 87 point some million people were, I don't know, a large number of people were affected. But how much money was involved? You don't hear anything about it. And when we talk about it also, they steal not only the money. They also steal industrial, weapons, secrets, whatever it is, and that's worth billions of dollars. So the Chinese are doing it, the Russians are doing it, everybody is doing it. ISIS is good at it too. And interrupting, cyber is also how to interfere, for example, with the electric grid, which is terrorism, it's not the money now. So because the West is still not, the technology was developed much faster than the prevention. So when you develop something, you have to look into, okay, so how this works and how this can be attacked. It didn't go that way, and it's a very big threat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question, right at the back. Oh, and then gentleman there, right at the back, and then gentleman in the middle. Yeah.
Hello. First of all, thank you for your speech. And then I have a questions, like two questions about Western countries and Middle Eastern countries. First of all, what is the Western countries' role in the funding the terrorism? And then second is
In the founding or funding?
funding.
Okay.
Sorry, my pronunciation. And then who is the best ally of Saudi Arabia, and is Israel a pure country?
Israel is pure as the new snow. What do you mean?
I didn't hear you.
Yeah. That's it?
That's all. That's all.
Yeah. Then,
Wait a minute. Israel funding terrorism or what?
No. I mean, according to your speech, I wanted to ask that, like, is Israel a pure country? It's like, you know, I don't know, the best, one of the best
What
countries.
do you mean pure?
There is no terrorism in there, no funding terrorism in there. There is no crime in Israel.
Who said that? No, there is
I'm just
crime.
wondering.
No, there is crime in Israel, and read the newspapers, or not the newspapers, read government statistics, or go to the court files. Israelis are like every other nation. They have the murderers, and they have the thieves, and they have the fraudsters, okay? But Israel is not funding terrorism. Israel is fighting terrorism. And Israel is the target for most Islamic terrorists. Usually all of them, but some Islamic terrorists start locally and then they go internationally. That's what the Quran, they want to kill all, the Quran says that they have to kill all the Jews, okay? So now they have been a target, and that has been developed really and became a major issue, a political issue, an actionable issue with the PLO. And yet they were funded, continue to be funded by the European Union was a big, big part of it. And I calculated once how much money they have received. There are no refugees. After the tsunami, the Syrian refugees, all the war, nobody had received so much money as the Palestinians. Where are they? According to my own calculations at the time, if the Palestinians were using the money properly, every Palestinian should have a little house and a car in the garage. They don't. Their leaders have a lot, but they don't, and they're sending them to die. How the West was helping in funding the West. Islamic terrorism. Well, they really don't pay. I don't think that the West really understands how Muslims think. They understood better how communists think, because it was. Some people say communism was a religion, but really, not really, right? It was an ideology, but here it is. And people were more westernized to begin with. This is something that is 7th century desert traditions. So it's very important to understand what they say and to really believe what they say. Because many times people say, oh, they just say it, you know. They mean it. And if you look at what they say and what they do, you will see that they're, actually, they do what they say they will. So take it seriously.
The gentleman in the middle, yes.
And who is the best ally of Saudi Arabia? You can give.
Yes.
The United States.
Yeah, this is that.
This gentleman.
Well, England is not far behind, by the way.
Yes.
Thank you. I would like to first thank the Danube Institute and Dr. Ehrenfeld for giving us the chance to talk about this very current and important topic, which is modern terrorism. And I would like to, of course, agree with the first argument you gave, that terrorism is a very complex, concept that cannot be tackled in only one direction. And that's why I thought we were only going to focus on the monetary side of funding terrorism, but we brought into the social, cultural, which is important. However, this is not really a question, but an opinion, seeing that we're having a debate about it. And I believe that having this conceptualization of terrorism as being linked towards Islamic fundamentalism actually fuels modern terrorism. Picturing modern society in this great clash of civilization where you have, on a religious front, where you cannot live in a democratic Islamic nation, actually creates this kind of environment where you could say modern terrorism is actually a reactionary force, where you have this rhetoric being used in mostly Western countries of depicting terrorism as being linked to Islamic religion, is actually causing this resurgence of identity and aggressive identity expressionism through jihadism and, of course, committing horrendous crimes. And my opinion is that actually we should look at both sides of the cultural flows and how this is actually impacting. And one example would be the highly controversial Muslim ban that was implemented, where the first version that was presented was putting Iraq inside this Muslim ban, but then had to be taken out because Iraq was one of the main allies of the US in the fight against ISIS.
So here you took the Iraq example. Iraq, I wouldn't go with list to begin with. There are Muslims everywhere, okay, and Muslim radicals everywhere. So why Iraq and not London, or England? There are many radical Muslims in England. We had many terrorist attacks in England, and they are English second generation. So why not England? The way that they are being designated is wrong, and there is a better way to do it. Because the fact that you are a Muslim doesn't mean that you are a terrorist. Doesn't mean that you will go and commit something, right? So, but how do you know what people think? The Israelis developed something that actually can tell you what your intentions are. Sounds like Big Brother and everything, but it's true, and it works. And for some reason, it has not been, actually the American government paid quite a lot of money to help develop it, and they ended up, when Obama was in charge, the State Department said that this will be violation of your civil rights. How is it a violation for civil rights? You sit in front of the computer for 5 to 7 minutes, and you look at pictures and you respond. The pictures are not of jihad, the pictures are of nothing, okay? And it's any language. And you just respond to what you see. And that goes to a big pool of data, and it is done automatically by the computer, not by humans. So why not use it? That was the response. So there is a way to do it.
Can I just ask, is there a failure rate?
The failure rate was, the success was 96%.
So there's a failure rate of 4%, okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask the gentleman a question, since he raised this very interesting one, and come back. First of all, I'd be interested in how you react to Ms. Ehrenfeld's reply, Dr. Ehrenfeld's reply, and secondly, if one were making rules about the suitability of people to be admitted as immigrants to a country, would there be in the United States, could you have a rule like, for example, keeping out people who had strongly anti-Semitic views. And obviously, after 1917 and then after 45, there were questions you were asked if you wanted to migrate to America about whether you'd been a Nazi, whether you were a communist. And maybe we can disaggregate some of those questions so that you can say, are you someone who accepts the democratic government? I'm coming off this at the top of my head at the moment, but you can see the direction I'm going. We don't want, for example, to import anti-Semitism, to take one case, so we might ask questions related to that. So there are two questions. One is, what do you think of what you've just heard from Dr. Ehrenfeld, and what do you think about the idea of asking the kind of questions that are not directly about religion or something, but are about some of the expressions which we know, some of the views that we know extreme radicals have got.
By the way, just let me add something, that it is not only, it can be used against Muslim, potential Muslim terrorists, but it can be used by a company who hires people and they want to know that they will not steal the store.
Yeah.
So it depends what you are asking. But in general, you cannot say, if you ask somebody, well, are you a member of the Communist Party, or are you opposing this or that? That's too direct and people will lie.
Yeah, they will.
So you have indirect questions in order to find out what the intention is. And it works.
Okay.
And they tried it, by the way, they are using it in Singapore, they are using it, American airlines, many American airlines that operate in Latin America are using it in order to, when they hire local people, they use it in order to make sure that they don't have somebody that will cause problem, that will put a bomb on the airline or something like that. They use it in China now. They use it in different places because it works. So.
Okay, over to you.
Well, I'm going to try something very complicated of trying to answer both questions at the same time. Please bear with me. Well, I can speak personally about the case of the European Union. I have lived in Belgium for 4 years, and of course, I was there when the horrendous attacks happened at the airport, Zaventem. And I would say, first answering your question about how to do the vetting of not importing this form of terrorism, I would say, of course, it's a very wide debate on how to solve it, and I would say the main problem is not really about importing terrorists, but importing this form of terrorism, because the main cause we've seen in Europe is actually this phenomenon of homegrown terrorists. And this has been shown where you actually saw that these were third-generational young individuals who actually turned towards, terrorist behavior, and not that they actually came from the, terrorist hotbeds. And I would say the main problem with that is that we're not really focusing on the process of integration. And that's why I'm looking again at this fact of this rhetoric about distinguishing between the West and Islam. And
many Muslims don't want to integrate, and they say so. And they identify themselves by religion and not by nationality.
But then, of course, this is my opinion, I think this is a socially constructed phenomenon where, of course, I could throw in a lot of terms and concepts that would take us out to debate on, which is deteriorization and re-territorialization, which is just that this is a re-expression of the identity because of globalization, where people are not feeling associated with their environments. And a way to do this is, of course, integration, but integration in which point is it that should the foreigners integrate to the home country's culture, or should it through the...
Or should the home culture integrate with their...
Yes, because we are living in the 21st century of globalization, where this is a very hot topic. I lived in the Netherlands with the controversial Zwarte Piet. I don't know if everyone knows about it, and this has been...
I know Ali Harshi, so that's okay. Yeah.
Which falls within this debate. And now about, of course, vetting and doing this profiling, I think this is controversial and, of course, considered an upfront...
It's not profiling.
No, apologies.
Right.
How to be able to understand people's actions through these kind of questionnaires. I think it's an infringement of a personal information when it is created in this environment where you're depicted as if you score as, let's say, as an Islamic follower, then you're branded as dangerous, practically.
It has nothing with Islam. It has nothing to do with Islam. They have special, they constructed, in Singapore, They constructed whatever they want, which is adaptable to their culture. If you are hostile to this culture, we won't let you in.
I think there's no way we can resolve this particular
No, not
argument
now.
here and now. So we have to move on. We're really, I think we should be ending if there's going to be a little reception and you're going to get the chance to meet Dr. Ehrenfeld personally. So I'm going to just allow another couple of questions and then we'll, well, first of all, the lady there. Just, yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. I have a question. It may seem naive or it's very simplistic. We have spoken about the funding of terrorism. It's been very interesting to hear the different sources that you described, and particularly the government, which is what I'd like to focus on. My question, the government and particularly Saudi Arabia, but governments in general, my question is, what's the end game? I have heard that you talk about there's religion, certainly, that's involved. There's business considerations, that are quite complex and certainly at play. There's politics and you've also mentioned going towards colonialism and the idea of pushback you use the word colonial. You use the word
Yes,
colonial.
yeah.
So my interpretation in terms of what I would call empire, this whole way in which the West tries and does succeed quite well in putting an imprint across the world. And so there's resentment and there's a pushback and there's those kinds of considerations. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to governments in terms of their actual motivations in continuing to fund all over the world terrorism.
I have an idea. Ken, do you want to answer? Ken Abramowitz, he's on the board of the American Center for Democracy, and he is looking into how to save the West. Just this question.
Okay, so just rephrase an exact question that you want to ask. You asked several things at the same time.
Well, the actual question was, what's the end game? There seems to be lots of reasons put forth for
One day game to whom?
for governments. I'm thinking of governments, and I'm particularly
Saudi Arabia,
Saudi
okay.
Arabia.
Look, we're basically, I hate to say this, we're basically in World War III right now. Political Islam, the politicization of religion. Political Islam has declared war on Western civilization. So either they win or we win. So the end game is everyone joins Western civilization and the rule of law, or everyone joins political Islam and lives under dictatorship. So that's basically the simple way to look at it in 50 years.
So what you're saying, you're suggesting there's a genuine religious component.
Yes.
I would regard Islam as a Muslim Brotherhood operative mentioned to me once. He left the Muslim Brotherhood. Islam's a 20% religion, 80% political movement. The 20% religion is protected by our Constitution, Bill of Rights, and similar laws here. We're not discussing the 20%. We're discussing the 80%, the politicization of a religion. In other words, the imposition of a religion on somebody else. That's what we're fighting about. And either we stop that or we'll all become Muslims. It's pretty simple.
Or die.
Yeah, think of it in World War II terms. If Germany had won, everyone would be Nazis, or if the normal countries of the world won, the Nazis would become normal. Well, that's what happened. The Nazis became normal, so to speak. Well, we had to kill 60 million people. I'm not looking for a repeat of that. But I'm just saying, in World War II, it was either the Nazis or the normal people, and the normal people won. So this is somewhat akin to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
And there's the last question from this lady here.
One more thing about the Saudis. The end game of the Saudis is survival. It's a big royal family. They want to stay there. And it involves politics and business and everything. But the major, sure, they start a little bit more. This is about survival. Survival. Yeah. For the Saudi royal family.
Okay, I have one and a half questions, sorry, almost two. You talked about both Turkey and Saudi Arabia as far as, I know I've seen it in Bosnia and Albania, especially in Bosnia, that both countries are present. And do you see a cooperation or competition or any kind of connection with, both countries are trying to...
Competition?
Or... Because the Bosnians see it like they can relate to the Turks, of course, because of their history. They don't see the Saudis as any. They kind of they don't understand what the Saudis are doing there. This is one question: whether they are just whether this is pure religious or.
Yeah.
And the other question is: you've talked about the Turkish propaganda and schools, etc. How do you evaluate the Gulenist schools? Because there are a lot of, the Gulenist movement. Is it relevant? Because it's interesting that the government is fighting the Gulenist movement. So if the aim is to propagate Islam, then they shouldn't be doing so.
Erdogan, it's not only propagating Islam, it's their version of it. And Erdogan is a Muslim brother. So he wants to promote really his version of it. The Wahhabis are more the difference between a murder, well, anyway, different level of radicalism. So since the Ottoman Empire ruled a lot of the European continent and elsewhere, he wants to go back, especially because wherever the Muslims, whatever the Muslims conquer, whatever the Muslims buy, they don't buy it for them. They buy it for Allah. I mean, they possess something, they fought something, they conquered the place. This is for Allah. They are holders for whatever it is, but everything is for Allah. So once it belongs to Allah, it has to go back to Allah, and it's not a joke. There was a big derelict building in Chicago at the Loop, at the center, which was built in 1929. And the municipality, the city of Chicago, said, well, we have to get rid of this because it's to demolish it. It's in a very central place, a very expensive real estate. The imam of the Central Mosque in Chicago went to court and said, this belongs to Muslims. How come? Why does it belong to the mosque? Why? Because in 1929, when this was built, a Muslim builder was killed in an accident here. So with his blood made it Islamic. You know what? The city of Chicago gave it to him. But this is how they think about things. Saudi Arabia had been very much, both Saudi Arabia and Iran were funding what was going on in the Balkans, and very active there. The Saudis has a big, actually, and that's where we found all kinds of documents about both Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood. And many Muslims funded the Muslim Brotherhood activities and organizations. Because at the beginning, when Saudi Arabia was established, well, okay, so they were in the desert. They really didn't know, they were illiterate. And Nasser at the time, they wanted to throw Nasser away. They wanted to kill him, actually, to assassinate him. So he imprisoned many and he expelled many. So they went to Saudi Arabia and said, well, we are well educated. They're all well educated, universities and stuff. We will open schools for you. So we will help your population. And they came there for a couple of years, and then they suggested, actually, the Muslim brothers that were there to start an international foundation So the first Saudi Arabian international charity to spread Wahhabism was the idea of Muslim Brotherhood. And for years they worked together until the Muslim Brotherhood started to threaten the Saudi kingdom. So, and when it comes to that, by and large, if there is the Shiite, the Sunnis, the whatever, different kinds of Sunnis, when it comes to fighting the infidels, they will unite. They will square the business with them, among them later. But the first target is the infidels and the religion.
I know there are other questions that are being raised, and I'm sorry, but Dr. Ehrenfeld is going to be here for another 45 minutes, and you can put these questions to her personally, but we really have to draw the formal proceedings to a close, because, frankly, the big question on the table between some members of the audience and her is whether or not radical Islamism is a complete perversion of Islam, and therefore, in a sense, Islam is no sense responsible for it, or whether it's, in some sense, there is some necessary attachment between radical Islamism and the wider religion. I do not intend to pronounce on that question myself here, like some multicultural pope. So if I can call the formal proceedings to a halt, thank particularly Dr. Ehrenfeld for a lively and fascinating presentation, and an important one, and for evoking an interesting and strong response from the audience. I'd like to thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much indeed. I should have added the word formidable to the performance, and then say, please stay, please continue arguing and discussing. Dr. Ehrenfeld will be here for about 45 minutes, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
At least it was not boring.